A year on from the dashed hopes of Copenhagen, and the world's politicians are at it again. In Cancun, Mexico, they've renewed efforts to find a deal capable of combating man-made global warming. My guest today is one of the most vocal advocates of urgent action, President Mohamed Nasheed of the Maldives. Rising sea levels could submerge his Indian Ocean home by the end of this century. Is it time to stop hoping for the best and start planning for the worst? President Mohamed Nasheed, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much.
Your country is one of the most vulnerable in environmental terms in the entire world. Does this threat seem ever more imminent? Are there signs that things are changing?
It's a very present-day issue for the Maldives. We already have 16 islands where we are having to relocate people. We have water contamination problems. We have issues to do with food security because of sea temperature, ocean temperature changes. Yes, it is an issue that we are having to face, we are having to deal with in the present and now. If we can't find solutions in the next few years, we have a window of opportunity of about maybe 7 years, and if we are able to find a solution within that 7 years, we still have hope that we will be able to survive as a country, as a nation, as a community.
You did something rather extraordinary just before the Copenhagen summit. You took your entire cabinet underwater. You held a cabinet meeting under about 12 feet of water. That was a gimmick, and I just wonder whether, on reflection, given the seriousness of this issue and the difficulties there are politically to get things done, whether you feel that gimmick was actually a wise thing to do.
Well, you know, we had to impress upon the international community the seriousness of the issue, the challenges that we face. And yes, I do understand that, you know, it was very different, out-of-the-box thinking, but I still am with the view that the world is much more aware of the issue because of our cabinet meeting. And most heads of states have seen the meeting. Most people are aware of our situation, and just not us, all small islands and low-lying islands. And I think it has paid back.
But I'm interested in how you approach publicizing what you believe to be the necessary urgent actions and sending that message to the world. Another thing you've done recently is declare that the Maldives will be carbon neutral by 2020, and you've outlined how you're going to do it with renewables and solar power and everything else. Again, interesting, caused a big international stir, but of course won't make a blind bit of difference to the planetary impacts of global warming.
Well, the Maldives becoming carbon neutral per se is not going to make a difference to the level of carbon emission. But if we are able to find a low carbon development strategy where other countries can also mimic and map, then of course...
But they can't. That's the point I'm making. I mean, the Maldives is such an extraordinary and unusual place. You've got 350,000 people,
yes,
roughly, hundreds of, yes, islands, an economy built on one sector, which is tourism. You don't represent anything other than yourselves.
We do. All nations, all communities, all countries are a collection of families, a collection of homes. If we can deal with one home, one family, then it's only a question of multiplication. Yes, Maldives is just 300,000 people, but 1 billion people in India is also a section of 300,000 peoples. And if we can find a low carbon strategy for 300,000 people, that can very well be mapped on India or in China or anywhere else in the world. I don't think that our numbers are irrelevant in this sense. Smallness doesn't necessarily mean that you do not have viable economic solutions.
Let's talk about Cancun and the way in which the politics seems so very stuck still when it comes to seeking a global agreement on climate change actions. Stuck in the sense that the developed and the developing worlds still seem to have differences which cannot be bridged, even a year after Copenhagen when they were fully exposed?
Yes, but we are moving. I believe that we are moving in the right direction. We now have a number of developing countries who've come out with the idea that they have to find a low-carbon development strategy. And I think this idea and the concepts are also being tested and bought in India, in China. And I believe that it is quite possible for the rest of the world also to pick up on it. And the agreements, the understandings that we had in Copenhagen, if we can take them to Cancun and solidly wedge them, anchor them in the UNFCCC process, I think that's the right way, and that's a path that we should take. And we will hopefully come out with a legally binding agreement in South Africa.
Let's be specific. Let's talk about China. As things stand right now, the Chinese are saying, look, we will make commitments to seriously, significantly reduce our carbon intensity as measured against GDP. We will do that, but we are not prepared to make binding commitments, and we're not necessarily prepared to have the international community come in and verify and monitor every single thing we do. Now, the Americans say, unless the Chinese move on that, they're not going to move on a whole raft of other things that we'll talk about in a minute.
You know, this madness goes on. I don't disagree with it at all, the Americans and the Chinese.
So are you bitterly disappointed, say, with the Chinese?
Well, I'm very disappointed both with the Americans and the Chinese for so irrelevantly talking about this issue as if it's arms control or trade negotiations. You cannot cut a deal with Mother Nature. You cannot have a negotiation with planetary boundaries. They are fixed. So we all have to understand that we have to live within these boundaries. And I do actually believe that the Chinese government and the Chinese people will come around to these thinking and these ideas. And I see a lot of improvement, a lot of progress on China and in India, in South Africa, in Brazil, since the Copenhagen Accord.
I just wonder whether, over the last year, you've looked back at the way this whole climate debate has developed, and you've perhaps thought to yourself, it has been a mistake for developing countries to just form one bloc, and in some ways to be driven by the bigger and very powerful emerging economies, thinking of China, India, Brazil. Because I saw, indeed I saw it when I was talking to you in Copenhagen that year ago, that there was a huge influence being wielded by Beijing in particular, and Beijing's interest is fundamentally different from that of the poorer developing countries.
This is why we want to talk about big emitting countries and not necessarily developing countries and developed countries. Yes, there is an issue on that, but more and more we are seeing that a number of developing countries are coming to understand that, for instance, G77 doesn't necessarily look after our interests in these specific issues.
Do you feel that now? That the G77, which is this big bloc of poorer and emerging countries, it doesn't work in terms of representing your interests?
In terms of representing our interest in the climate change debate, I don't think that they do represent us, and they are working in our interest. So we don't need to be grouped and banded together in this. I keep saying that this is an archaic pre-war institution, organization that has become obsolete, and it's not really quite relevant right now.
This is what one of the senior US climate envoys, Todd Stern, said the other day. He said, you cannot build a system premised on the notion that China should be treated the same as Chad, for example, when China is now the world's largest emitter. And as a matter of political reality, we'd get no support within the United States, especially in Congress, for a climate agreement that required action of us, but not from China. Sounds to me on that particular point, you have now decided to align yourself with the United States.
No, we haven't decided to align ourselves with anyone, but we've decided to keep our stance in the middle, saying that this is not a rich country, poor country debate. This is a debate for everyone. And if we can all get together and find a solution to this, this is the only way that we can move forward. Well,
It's a very important word here.
It is a very important word, but what we are sensing and what we are seeing now is that it is moving along these lines. The United States really needs to do a lot more, perhaps a bit more than China, and we now seem to be bogged down in mentioning China all the time. But it's not just China, it's the United States as well. It's only Europe who is able to come up with a proper framework on this, and no one else is doing it. So I think...
But as Todd Stern's words alluded to, there is a political reality in the United States. You may not like it, he may not like it, but there is a reality with the Republicans now controlling the House, stronger in the Senate, which means that the sorts of actions Barack Obama wanted to take to make America central to the climate change project are now not going to be taken.
Well, I understand that they are finding alternative paths to the Congress and the Senate to see how they may be able to come up with other legislations as well. But then again, we all have parliaments and congresses, but leadership is when you go out and lead, not when you follow the pack. So I hope that there will be leadership in the United States, in China, in India, and elsewhere. I believe that it is possible to lead, and I believe that the people of the United States will listen to this. Yes, of course, we need to have grassroots action in the United States. People need to take this whole thing to the streets and let everyone know that here is a serious issue.